Hey guys, it's Chad from the Teach Better team, and I am absolutely thrilled to be building a grid live today, and we are going to be doing this all week. Today is December 27th, Monday, and I am here with Sandra Weir from Canada. She's a fifth and sixth grade science teacher, and we're going to be building a grid live right now. So let's go. Hey, how is it going? Sandra, how are you doing this morning?
It is going really well. You know what? I watched the video intro chat and I'm like, uh-oh, I'm on Daily Drop-In this morning. So like,
That's right.
super
This is
exciting.
absolutely
Yeah.
daily drop-in
Yeah.
takeover. Now, you know that everyone is used to seeing Ray's wonderful face here. I'm sorry, but you're going to have to deal with me for the next couple days. But don't worry, Ray and I are going to be doing this series all week, and we're super, super excited. I see Brianne Fennel's already saying hi. If you guys are coming in, just make sure in the comments you say hello and good morning. I hope everyone had a wonderful holiday. Sandra, how was your holiday?
It was great. It was really good. Nice and quiet, very, very sort of
Yeah,
COVID friendly holiday, but it was good. It was really good.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm stoked to get into building your grid. Would you give us a quick kind of rundown of your experience and your history with the grid so people know where you're coming from? Just remind them what grade you teach and your situation. I know we've worked on a math grid before, but today we're going to be focused on a science grid. So I'd love to just get some context for the audience.
Okay, sure. So I am a fifth and sixth grade teacher in Quebec. I'm in an area close to the town in the city of Montreal. I have what's called a combined class here. So like my fives and sixes are together in one class. We call them splits and all kinds of different things. But what I've been doing this year with the grid is experimenting kind of with doing one grid for both grade levels rather than doing that kind of simultaneous,
Yeah.
you guys work on this and you go there. Lifesaver, total lifesaver in math. So I'm super excited about doing the science one. I do teach all subjects. Here in Quebec, we have bilingual education it's either bilingual or French. So I am actually the French and English teacher for the kids. So I teach them everything. So this is like my
Wow.
first toe dip into the science world, but I've been a grid method classroom in math. This is my third year, and like my first experiment with my first grid, I introduced in February 2020, so right before shutdown. And again, that was like my lifesaver over
Yeah.
for online learning. So
That
here we
is
are.
absolutely fantastic. So, something I love about what you just said, and for anyone watching, if you've never done the grid, um, if you teach multiple subjects, I actually usually don't really recommend starting the grid in every subject when you're first getting going. I actually love the fact that you kind of honed your skills in math, you kind of got it under your belt, you worked out the kinks, because now when you're starting to transition to science, you know how it operates, your students know how it operates, and you're going to have much more success as you expand it, right? So actually that's a really good tip for anyone in this process is if you teach multiple subjects, start with one subject, work out the kinks, get it under your belt, get it moving, and get in that what I call the groove, and then you can start expanding it to other areas. There's no pressure to do it all classes, all day, every day. Like it's okay. A lot of times people get overwhelmed because they start doing those somersaults in their head, right? But it's really, really important that you kind of take it work out the kinks and then expand it, which I think is exactly what you did. Another really awesome thing that I want to just highlight because it's extra awesome in my head is that you're teaching multiple grades with a single grid. So if your standards are progressive in terms of building on content knowledge, it's really, really easy to make one grid for multi-level classrooms if you have them. So that's a really unique situation, Sandra, I think you have, but I think it's really cool that you're utilizing it in that way.
Mhm. Yeah.
So before I pull up our grid, could you give me a little bit of a heads up on the topic in the unit that you want to discuss today? And then we'll pull it up and we will get to work here.
Okay, so we were working on the topic that we're working on is actually for the fifth graders. That topic would be like defining and describing different natural phenomena. So like volcanoes and hurricanes, tornadoes, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And then you get to sixth grade and the kids have to compare and contrast them. So like the different damage you can have from each one and what causes each one and that kind of thing. So that worked out super well for me when I was picking a standard. I'm like, yeah, this one will work. We got different, DOK levels and everything.
Yeah, they literally used like the progressive DOK taxonomy when they were writing the standards, apparently, which is super nice for this model specifically. So once again, this is a dual grade level grid, 5th and 6th grade on natural phenomenon in science. So we're going to start working through this process on our grid development template, which is what the document that I'm going to bring up right here. And I hope everyone can see it. And as you can see, the topic is Earth's natural phenomenon. And the standards chosen for the grid are that students will be able to compare and contrast the impact of certain natural phenomenon on environments and on the well-being of individuals. So that's the standard for the 6th grade, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So just for consistency, we may want to add the 5th grade standard in there. It's not necessary for us to do right now, but I also am noticing that you said you're kind of identifying that as a level 3 DOK 3 standard.
Right.
Could you talk through how you arrived at that just for the audience?
Sure. Well, I mean, the compare and contrast was kind of a giveaway for me, right? When you're looking at DOK, and actually when you look at this planner, compare and contrast is right in it. So I was really excited to see that. Also, I'm figuring that if the kids don't, they have to be able to define the phenomena, show what they are, or apply their knowledge about them in order to compare and contrast. So like we kind of level up that way. And again, I think this was a good opportunity to kind of take something that the 5th graders needed to know that the 6th graders, quote unquote, should know, and then add that extra spin to it
Yeah, so a huge benefit to this is that for those 6th graders who might need some of that lower level content or that identification or definition of what these things are, if they don't remember, you got that covered, right? So you can easily do either a pre-assessment or start them at different places if you would need to. So I think that's really cool. I think that's a huge benefit here. So I actually completely agree that the comparative analysis is always going to be kind of hitting that level 3. So that is going to be the minimal level we want every single 6th grader to get to on your grid, correct?
Right.
So that is at the standard level. So this is something I just want to highlight really quick because a lot of times if teachers are just starting the grid, they go, every student has to finish the whole grid no matter what. And then we get into these things where, well, it depends, right? Like that's a really loaded statement. If the standard is written at a DOK level 4 or a higher level, maybe every kid needs to get to level 4 or potentially level 5 to extend beyond. However, if the standard's written at a DOK level 3, your minimum requirement for every student needs to be level 3 at standard. Some teachers will measure 1 deviation above standard for extended knowledge for their purposes. But another note for the grid that we're talking about here is if your 6th graders are just being asked to identify and define, in theory, the minimum level for a 5th grader, would be finishing level 1 because that's the level of that standard for their grade. So I just wanted to kind of hone in on that. A lot of times we talk about identifying the level of the standard. Now, one thing I want to note is traditionally we've used Webb's depth of knowledge, but I've also had teachers use Bloom's. I've had teachers use the 5 E's to develop their standards, especially their targets, especially in science. Even other taxonomies that they're comfortable with. But we're going to be talking in DOK here. I just want to kind of give that little note, as traditionally that's what we use. Now, let's take a look now that we have our standard, and let's start breaking down our targets. So what are the objectives for the students working up to and possibly beyond this standard? So it looks like you've already started some of this work, which is absolutely fantastic, Sandra. Would you like to read your first target for us?
Sure. So my first target is I can define certain natural phenomena, and they gave examples, like they give examples in our standards. So I wanted to make sure that I include those because they're probably need to knows, and so that's the 5th grade standard, right? Because we go cycles. So like you start in 5th grade and you work up and
spirals up as you go vertically.
Exactly. So that's my first target. And I thought it fit in perfectly because define and recall is right there. So it was a bit of a no-brainer for me to just insert that there.
Nice and easy.
Yeah.
So I really like your first target. And one thing I like is that you focused it on the language of the standard. So that's actually one of the reasons I think the 5th grade standard being written above, we don't need to put it there now, but just for reference, I would like to put the 5th grade standard above. And here's why. One of the most common things that can occur when we're making a grid is we break down the standard too much. Does that make sense? Yeah. So if I hear, I can identify and define natural phenomenon. If I'm a science teacher, I might know everything there is to know about natural phenomenon. I might know a ton about natural phenomenon. So I can easily get into the weeds really real quick and start listing and identifying and defining every term, every vocabulary that has anything to do with natural phenomenon. And I see this in grids sometimes. So instead of having a list of 10 or 12 vocabulary words or 8 to 10 vocabulary words, they'll have a list of 50 vocabulary words because they're giving you every piece of vocabulary that has anything to do with erosion, lightning, tornadoes. If we look at the standard, that 5th grade standard is probably just saying, do I know what erosion means? Do I know what lightning is? Do I know what a tornado is? Can I define and identify it in a category, right? So we need to make sure that we're not losing sight, I call it, of the big picture. So I actually think that's a really well articulated target. It's not too broad and it's still focused on the big picture, which is those examples that are specifically stated in the standard. So I like that we're keeping the focus, but I think this is a good note for anyone doing this work, whether you're in science or any other subject. We don't want to lose focus by getting so much into the nuts and bolts, especially at DOK level 1, that the students like losing the big picture, right? Because I've even had students, and you can tell me, I know I've done this, where I break it down too much. I break down the standard so much that they get stuck at level 1 on stuff they don't really need to meet the standard, right? So we don't want to create roadblocks unnecessarily. So I think you did a great job. Why don't we look at your DOK level 2 target, your level 2 target?
Sure. Now my level 2 target, what I did was I took, this is not actually part of our standards at all. So I did a little gap, bridging of a gap. And they also have to, like, using lab techniques is one of our standards, but it's very broad. It's like the student will use lab techniques to explore various topics. So I figure, okay, well, there's a good place to plug that right in there for the principal, right? And just show that it's there. So yeah.
And so I actually love this target. I have some suggestions we might be able to clarify a little bit. But when we talk about lab experiences and things like that, those are what I consider spiraling or year-long focuses, right?
Okay.
You're not just going to have students do lab techniques in this unit,
no,
right?
Exactly. Right.
So I would absolutely mention that it's a substandard or a covered standard of this, but
Hmm.
they're not necessarily going to master every lab technique known to science, right? So one thing I would also focus on is it says I can demonstrate first certain natural phenomenon. I would also, and you can tell me if you think this is going outside the standard,
Yeah.
but I think saying um, explaining or explaining the cause of or summarizing the cause of natural phenomenon, something like that.
Okay.
So at level 2, we can really get into that cause and effect.
Yeah.
So so explaining some aspect of the natural phenomenon could be another objective. So we can either keep this,
Mhm.
right? We
Right.
can either keep this or we could add another objective for this level that says, I can explain how natural phenomenon occur, example, erosion, if that's the focus of the standard. And I'm not looking at it directly right now, but um, so I'll cater to
Yeah.
your expertise. But does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah. No, that makes good sense. That
So
definitely makes good.
now the lab work and those lab techniques are driving towards causal explanation of the
Mhm.
phenomenon,
Right.
not just doing the techniques because the standard says it. So
Yeah.
now, um, so I would actually keep the lab technique stuff in there. I
Okay.
can demonstrate, or I can use lab techniques to explain how natural phenomena occur or demonstrate certain natural phenomena. That's fine too.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
for level 2, I think it's really, really important that we get into that cause and effect, that explanation of why or how.
Mhm.
And a good rule of thumb, and this is more like the verbs I'm going to use are more social studies ish, but I think they apply across the board. When we think about level 1, I think of who, what, when, where, right? Like it's just like who wants to be a millionaire, identification type questions. What year did this happen? Who signed it? What, what did you notice? Did it go up? Did it go down? What is an atom? What is, like
Mhm.
what is a hurricane? Like those types of things. When we get to level 2, the why and the how become the important part, right? So a student being able to think and explain how or why or summarize how or why something happens or the cause one thing has on another thing in these systems that we're discussing, that actually that's really needs to be the focus because
Mhm.
by the end of level 2, something I often say as a quick kind of reminder is the student should be able to tell you who, what, when, where, why, and how.
Right.
Because when they get to level 3 and 4, they need to be doing stuff with that information.
Mhm.
We're no longer kind of covering new stuff on level 3 and 4. We're digging deeper with the stuff that we have. So I feel really good about where we're at
Yeah.
um,
Okay.
with,
Good.
with with this right now.
Mhm.
So let's take. Do you want to go ahead and read number 3?
Sure. So number 3 is it fit right in. It was like I can compare and contrast the impact of certain natural phenomena on the environment or on the well-being of individuals. So that's, uh, it's a long way of saying what's the difference between the impact of a hurricane and an earthquake, for example.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah.
I can compare and contrast the impact of certain natural phenomena on the environment or the well-being of individuals. So now we're extending
Yeah.
the knowledge we have and how it compares and contrasts with its impact on environments, its
Mhm.
impact on people, as well as those impacts in comparison to one another. So
Right.
there's tons of analysis going on right here,
Mhm.
right? Tons of probably data that they're going to have to be looking through. Um, all of those things I think are absolutely spot on.
Okay.
If you ask me, so I think that's really good. I do think that once again we're actually so this is definitely hitting that standard, and this is one thing I love about um, your grid, your
Mhm.
development right here is that your level of standard, your objective sounds just like the standard.
Right.
And that should be the case, right?
Mhm.
When you get to that objective that is measuring the standard, you should see some of the same words. You should sound very, very similar. And that's a good kind of litmus test. That's a good like dipstick test. If you're making a grid and you're looking at what is the level of the standard, and you say it's a DOK level 2 or it's a DOK level 3. When you are writing that target, okay, for that level, you need to make sure that that target is like measuring what you said it was going to measure. I think this does very, very well. So I think that is good. Now I see that your level 4 is still left blank. So do we want to do some brainstorming around some of our level 4 stuff? Do you have any ideas, or do you just want to kind of talk it out?
I'd like to talk it out with you, which is one of the reasons I left it blank, because I think like it sounds like there's a lot of room for some really cool stuff. I just, I'm not sure what the cool, like, I mean, you could, like create and design, I thought of, the traditional tornado in a bottle, right? Have the kids create, but I don't know if that's really creating, because that's just.
This is correct. Yeah. So this is a very common kind of quick go-to thing where you find that thing that connects. Like if I want them to learn about volcanoes, I want them to just make a paper mache volcano.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily, first of all, it can create misconceptions because it's not how the mechanism of the volcano works. This is my universal example of like things that people think are DOK level 4 activities, right? Yeah. Is like the paper mache volcano. Well, the student doesn't necessarily have to create anything. They're just following steps or looking at a picture and labeling a physical model. That's only DOK level 2 at best, or DOK level 1, which is more likely. So when we're thinking about this, they need to be creating new ideas from existing information. So if we think about where the student is mentally right now and what they know and what they can do with that information, we know that they know what the phenomenon are. They can demonstrate and explain how natural phenomenons occur, and can compare and contrast the impact of certain natural phenomena on the environment. Now, as I'm reviewing this, I'm actually thinking at level 2, we may also want to mention, explain, or summarize the impact phenomenon can have, because that is a missing component here. So I think in level 1 or level 2, we need to enter that piece of information in some component, because we're talking about the impacts when we haven't defined what those are. We're just comparatively analyzing things that we haven't defined yet. So I'm just kind of talking through my own thought process here. So I feel better about that now in my head. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does actually. And then you've got that kind of piece, because otherwise we're expecting something from the kids, like they haven't done that step. We're expecting them to go from step 1 to jump up to something else.
So you had suggested, and I don't know if you actually suggested this, but you were thinking around like tornado in a bottle, like recreate the phenomenon with. But I think like pinning them to a tornado in a bottle is dangerous, because I can replicate a tornado in a bottle without knowing anything about tornadoes, right? Like I can essentially go, look, I followed the directions and it happened. Give me my grade. I know things. When we have to think about what that is representative of. One of the in Ohio, this is a common thing, is we focus on engineering when we get to this level. We focus on creative design and things like that. So something you might be able to do is have the students pick a natural phenomenon and create an architectural structure that can survive a natural phenomenon, or reduce the impact of a natural phenomenon. So this is directly going to tie into the standard of the impact on the environment and well-being of individuals. So the question we can ask students is, how can we help the environment and individuals against these natural phenomenons? So I can design or engineer solutions or preventative measures that reduce the impact of natural phenomenon on the environment or individuals. So a couple of things I want you to notice about that statement that I just made is it's very broad. Would you agree?
Yeah. Oh no, but I love this, because like I said, the tornado in a bottle was like, they're making something, but they're not creating it. They can look that up. They can Google it and figure out how to do it. right? They don't
Correct.
have
I
to
can,
know
yeah,
this.
I can make a chocolate chip cookie following a recipe. That
Right.
doesn't mean I can make a better chocolate chip cookie by modifying or comparing the recipe. Or it doesn't mean I can create my own recipe from the original recipe based on my knowledge of what chocolate chip cookies are, right?
Right.
So like we can take the creative, like just because a student's making something doesn't automatically go DOK level 4. It depends what the thinking is behind the making, right? And another example is like I can make a Lego castle without knowing anything about the medieval class system, right? But that might be a project a teacher does. If there's no explanation around it, there's no real meat on that bone. So this is actually a really good conversation, I think, also about when we're looking at what the students are doing in that type of project, which is we're going to get to that when we start talking about the grid. But when I think about a student designing the structure, it's not about the structure itself. It's not even about the PowerPoint or whatever. It's about the thinking that goes in and the questions they're answering around that design. So I could have a student go, look, I put some string, or I put some, not string, I put some scaffolds and I put some slinkies underneath a house, and now it is earthquake proof. Well, I can just shove some stuff under a house and say it's now earthquake proof and check the box. But that is much different than going, I know how earthquakes move the ground. Here is a structure that I've created that negates that force by opposing it in this way, allowing the structure to stay sound and not fall, or windows will not break, or whatever that ends up being, right? I'm getting into the rabbit hole here. But now we're getting into do you actually understand the forces behind these natural phenomenon, the impacts, and all of those other. So we need to make sure the questions around this target are focused on that standard and not, did you build something or not, right? Like that's just something I want everyone to put in the back of their minds as we're talking through this, because I think that's really, really, really important. I think that's really, really important. Alex had a really good point. He said a tornado ball is more of a learning-based project or a demonstration, which I totally agree, rather than a project based on learning. You have to focus on the learning, not the activity, which I think you would agree with all day. Level 5, this could be interesting. So something I talked about with level 5, and level 5 is something that catches a lot of teachers kind of off guard. They get stuck here because it's like not a DOK level, and kids have already mastered the standard and they want them to be engaged in the process. So there needs to be value to the work, right?
Right.
So when we get to level 5, there's two options that I strongly suggest. Extending level 4 to reality can be one option. So something we could do is level 4 is designing, explaining, defending your idea for a structure. Maybe they design blueprints, and level 5 could be you make it.
Oh, wow. Oh, yeah.
So that's one thing we could do if that's what we're thinking. But another thing we can do is I used to have create your own project, sort of an open template on level 5 where they would pick a topic from the work that we had done. They would pick a topic from the work that we had done and make their own project that I would have to sign off on. But in this specific example, I do think them physically creating the thing that they designed could be a great extension to the work. Using household items or what have you, you kind of, so I can create, build and design, and build a prototype of my structure. So I would also put some clarifiers in that level 5 and say, I would say, that can reduce the impact of natural phenomenon. So when we create targets, this is really important, and I'm saying this for everybody watching. When we create targets, they need to be measurable individually, and they need to be specific enough to be measured. Does that make sense? So if we just say, I can build the prototype is my target for level 5, there's no clarification of what the prototype is actually being measured on. Does that make sense? However, I can build a prototype of my structure that can withstand or reduce. So now there's clarifiers. Can it withstand or reduce? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because I know exactly what you mean, because it's like then it has meaning. Like rather than just saying I'm going to build it, right, and it's going to look good, they're saying I'm going from my design, which comes from my knowledge, which, you know.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
So another thing, which I'm just thinking through this, on level 4, we could also say, I can defend the materials, resources, and design of a structure to combat the impact of certain natural phenomenon on the environment or individuals. Now, you'll notice something I keep doing is I keep on stealing language from the standard, right?
Yeah, right.
I'm always going back to that well over and over and over again. The reason I'm doing that, and I hope I think you're with me on this. The reason I keep doing that is because I don't want to stray from the focus, right? I need to keep going back to that standard and go, what am I focused on? What am I measuring? Because even though we're just at the target level, I even feel myself getting excited about the project.
Yeah.
I feel myself getting super excited about the activities I'm going to have them do. And that's how teachers think, right? We get so excited about the idea of like planning the lesson and the experience of the learner, which I love and we all get excited about. But sometimes if we don't take the time to just calm ourselves down and focus on the focus, which is that standard and those objectives, once we have that, when we go to our next step, which is going to be our mastery questions and designing our learning opportunities, now we can start to get excited and really do the work that we love doing, which is creating meaningful learning for students, right? But if this work, the stuff we're doing when we develop our targets, isn't done well, the foundation of our house, funny enough, is not going to be stable. It's not going to be able to survive the impact of the phenomenon of of the student learning, because it's not going to be focused enough, right? I love that I just worked that in there. That was fantastic.
Very clever.
So I feel good about our targets. How are you feeling looking at the work we just did?
Yeah, I'm feeling really good about them. See, now the 4 and 5, I'm glad I left that and we talked it through. Like you gave me those ideas, because now it makes sense, because level 5 too, kids tend to get into your independent project, give me a proposal, which I've done before. They tend to get kind of bogged down and they just want to do research, because research
they just want to check the box.
Yeah, they want to check the box, and research is, to them, you Google it, you figure out how to say it a different way, you put it in there. And I keep explaining to them that's not what level 5 is. But this defines it a lot better for them in this particular grid. So I like that.
So Alex had a question, and I want to address it. He said, does level 4's target need a clarifier that it is designing and that the building and prototype will be level 5? So Alex, I actually don't think it needs additional clarification, because the language used in the objective for level 4 is that they can design the structure, not that they can build and create the physical structure. So because it is focused on the design only, I think we are okay. I do think that I can defend the materials and design of the structure that I propose, or something like that, to combat the impact of natural, like, once again, I'm going to keep on going back to the well.
Yeah. Just because I'm lazy about typing the end, but that's okay. I'm going to put that in there.
So here's a nice thing we're doing with these objectives as well. You'll notice in level 4, there's 2 different targets, which means if I'm creating a rubric for a project that I'm developing, guess what's going to go in that rubric? The fact that they can, The fact that they can design it, check. Is it designed to effectively, right?
Yeah.
That can withstand this.
Right.
But also that they can defend the design against expertise. So you can go, why did you choose this versus that? Them being able to explain and defend that is very, very important. And I also think shows further knowledge of the phenomenon that we're trying. So Alex, that's kind of my clarification needed for level 4. Holly Stewart also said, while planning grids, it's so important to be intentional and purposeful. Absolutely. So something I hope that you guys are noticing is that Sandra and I just took a really long time, actually about 30 minutes for this part. Now, I'm not saying you have to spend 30 minutes every single time, but it's really important that we are happy with this. Because if we are not happy, if these are not well designed, everything we're building onto next is not going to be as stable or focused as we need it to. So a big red flag I often see is when a teacher that is first starting the grid goes, cool, here's a grid. I'm going to use it like a calendar, and I'm just going to dump all my lessons directly into the grid where I think they fit based on DOK. So they're not really analyzing like the start of the process, which is, do I know where I'm headed, right? And so it becomes almost like a dumping ground for stuff they're already doing, which it might very well end up being in the end. It might align perfectly and beautifully, but it might not too. So this is the work. This is the nuts and bolts, and it's not always super fun. I'm a nerd and I like it, but this is the work that's going to make sure every other aspect of the grid is solid, aligned, and doing what we want it to, which is growing knowledge and increasing mastery of our learners. So I'm going to scroll down to our next component here, Sandra. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
So now we're getting into our mastery questions. So in case you're unfamiliar with this, this is a teacher-centered exercise more than a student-centered exercise. And this is not something that ends up on the grid. However, these are the question items that we're going to be using for do nows and quick checks and assessing mastery of the objectives that we just came up with. So I'm not going to have Sandra redo all of this because we probably have to add the new standards or the targets that we. So one thing I would have you do, Sandra, is add those targets and update them in the left-hand column here. I'm not going to grade it, so it's okay. Like if we just use it as reference.
Yeah.
And I'm actually, because of time, I don't really want to go through like every single one of these questions. But when you're going through this, what you would do is you would look at your objectives that we just came up with, and you'd say, what questions does a student need to be able to answer to prove mastery or competency of the target that we developed, right? What do they have to be able to answer or prove for me to check the box and go, you understand this? That's really what we're doing. A lot of times teachers will skip this step, or they'll kind of go, yeah, I got it. It's fine. I'll grab the quiz from the back of the book or chapter review or whatever that is. And I would caution anyone that's kind of in that mode, at least make sure you're thinking through this, because if you create what I call a bank of questions, which is essentially what this is, you now have those spiraling questions that you can ask students verbally, you can use on quick checks, you can use on exit slips, and you literally can just recycle these questions over and over again to measure what you need to measure in your grid. So for me, this is a huge help for teachers, and it prevents the idea of, I'm going to grab this quiz off of Google or the textbook and hope it aligns to what I taught, right? Versus I know it aligns because I designed it that way. I know what I'm measuring. So let's go through the first one, and then we'll kind of move on after that. Does that make sense? All right. Do you want to go through that? And then let me realign this for you so it looks a little better.
Okay.
Can you see that okay?
Yeah, I can see that just fine. So the first one was I can define natural phenomena. So that's our fifth grade, where our fifth grade standard is. But again, our sixth graders have had a couple of COVID years. So even though it's supposed to be something that they've mastered, supposed to is kind of a weird term right now and ever actually. So the questions are, what are weathering and erosion? Because of course, it's funny you were talking about splitting hairs, because then I was looking at erosion and defining erosion is there are like many different kinds, 4, 6. So I put weathering in there just to kind of make sure that they knew the difference. What causes lightning, because they all know kind of what lightning is, but so I put what causes it. What are hurricanes and tornadoes? What causes a volcano to erupt? Because again, kids are fascinated with volcanoes. They know what they are. But like you said about the baking soda and vinegar volcano, that's not really how a volcano works. Like, how does a volcano work? How does that pressure build up and all those different things? And then what causes an earthquake? So I don't know if those are actually define and recall questions now,
That's
right?
the discussion I wanted to have.
Yeah.
You're taking us, we're like synced up. I love this.
Yeah, this is good.
So we can actually fix this pretty easily. So what causes a volcano to erupt and identifying the processes that cause a volcano eruption are two different levels of understanding.
Mhm.
Being able to explain how a volcano erupts is a different level than being able to go, magma heats, it rises, and this. But being able to explain why those things happen is the
Mhm.
extended level. So I think
Right.
what causes a volcano to erupt is a loaded kind of there's a lot on that bone. So I think we need to just kind of like focus the question a little bit more, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Mhm.
So I can identify and define the processes that cause a volcano to erupt. Does that
Okay.
make sense?
Yeah.
Or I can identify or I can define the processes that an earthquake um, that causes an earthquake. Because now they're just identifying the steps, basically, right? They're just identifying like the components of an eruption
Yeah.
versus the explanation of why or how those things happen. So,
Mhm.
so this is actually a really great example of making sure we know what we're asking our students,
Yeah.
right? Like, and I love, and I thank you so much, by the way. I haven't thanked you yet, and this is
Oh,
absolutely amazing for everyone who gets to watch it. Us going through this brainstorming and
yeah.
this process, because this is a scary process, and you're putting it out there for the world. So
Yeah. It
this is
is. It
amazing.
is. I mean, I was sweating by myself. I should have phoned you last Thursday. But anyways, it's okay.
I've had to calm. We have a great group of guests this whole week, and
Mhm.
I've had several phone calls of just like, it's okay, we're gonna walk through it.
Yeah.
It's all good. I feel better about that. What are the processes which cause a cause? Because
Yeah.
now that's an identification question. It's
Mhm.
not a explanatory question or a
Right.
summarization question.
Yeah.
So I really really like that, and I think we can kind of do the same thing with some of those um, other components, right?
Yeah. Right.
Um, but even identifying and defining the components of lightning, like what, because you said students know what lightning is, but
Mhm.
do they? Like if
Yeah.
like they know if they look at lightning, it's lightning, right?
Mhm.
But do they know the components of what lightning, like do they actually understand that that's electricity going from one place to the next due to, like, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, do they know it's electricity? I don't know. Do they know it's electrically charged particles?
Right.
I don't know. So like that's the kind of minutia that I think we need to get to at this level of
Okay.
when we say identify the components of lightning, right?
Mhm.
Knowing it's because they might also think, oh, well, lightning's, just I don't even know what sort of, misconceptions they could have.
Yeah.
But we need to be careful in science of not assuming too much.
I know.
While being careful, we don't get in so far deep that we don't confuse.
Mhm.
Does those adjustments make sense?
Yeah. I heard it as I said it, Chad. Like as I was saying it, I'm like, no, maybe they don't know. Right?
But so this is part of the work I think that makes this methodology so powerful, because you thinking through this is going to make you ask better
Mm.
um, better questions to your students, right? It's going to make your assessments better. It's going to make all those components better.
Mm.
Holly said it's scary to see some of the activities that have been used in the past that don't actually support the learning that you want for your students.
Yes.
Absolutely. So I'm actually going to kind of fast forward a bit because we're running out of time,
Mhm.
already, which I could sit here all day and talk grids with you,
Yeah, I
Sandra.
know.
I just need, I just want you to know that. So once you have your questions, we really need to get into developing the learning opportunities. And this is probably the part that most people are familiar with. This is
Mhm.
literally the grid, right?
Right.
This is the thing that most people are like, oh, this is where all that stuff goes, right? Um, so what I'd like to do is start putting our targets in, if we could, just for reference.
Okay.
Could we copy and paste
Yep.
those, Sandra? That would be fantastic. So we're going to put those targets that we developed, we're going to put those in each of those level gray boxes. And I hope you notice that this wasn't just let's open up the grid and dump everything in there, right? It's really important that we go through this process and think through this process. You don't need to change the colors
I
or
don't need to
anything. We can
format
just
and
work.
stuff. Okay.
We can format later.
Okay.
They know it's a work in progress.
I know. Okay.
So as you're doing that, I'm just going to kind of talk through some of the processes I suggest when first starting. Okay. So you'll notice that Sandra is dumping in her targets that we just developed, and we're just getting stuff into the grid right now. When you start working on a grid, and I was guilty of this myself, I had to have everything perfect every step of the way, and it made my work time so much longer than it had to be. Eventually, I realized if I get my ideas on the paper or on the page or on the document, it made the work go faster. So instead of making sure I have every piece and component and link that I want to have on my grid, I don't need to do necessarily all of that all at the same time. So once I get my targets, I can start actually doing what I call structuring the skeleton of our grid. And oftentimes what I will suggest is that get the ideas of the types of things you want to do. So I bet you any money, and Sandra, you can tell me if I'm wrong, you already have ideas of the stuff you're going to do with your students in this grid, right?
Yeah.
You probably have a lab that you're thinking of, or multiple labs. You probably have a couple vocabulary activities or notes that you might have already developed and things like that. So one of the things that will reduce the overwhelm for a teacher when they're starting their grid is put the structure in. So instead of making sure you have everything possible in here, I would like Sandra to just put in things like vocabulary card activity, volcano lab, like really generic terms. I'd like you to kind of go through the grid and just put placeholders in there at the levels you think that think they're going to be in. Now, this will potentially drastically change from right now to when we finish the grid. But I'm going to tell you right now, I want you to watch as Sandra puts these like just ideas in here. I want you to mentally feel how much easier it's going to seem when we go through the levels once this structure is already put into place.
Okay. So there, can you guys all see level 1 now? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Yes. So yeah, that would be, so
level
level 1. Okay. So then usually I'll have the kids do like they have, I'll have them do like a Blue Kit activity. Okay. For vocabulary.
Cool. Perfect.
Because
then
getting
stuff on the page.
Stuff on the page. Okay. No explanation. All right. Good.
We're going to go through that. I want to get your ideas on the page so that we can dig in and start analyzing, reviewing, and summarizing. Right?
Okay. Okay. And then I might do like, say, a gallery walk, like there's some kind of an activity where they get
out. Like a stationed activity. Very cool. Love it.
Okay. And then I don't know, the third one might
And it's okay. You can have open spaces at this point. So this is a really beautiful moment, Sandra. I love it. I don't need you to fill every box.
Yeah.
What I want you to do is go, I have 2 activities I already know we're going to be on level 1, so they're on level 1. So now if you're done with the stuff that's already locked and loaded, let's go to level 2 or level 3. Just plug in what you can so that we have some sort of semblance of a flow, so that way we can either add activities, change boxes, reduce, you know what I mean? Like we can do all of those things.
Okay. So like I have a few labs that I want to use. So there's an erosion lab, there's a volcano lab. There is there's a hurricane versus tornado one. So, those are, sorry.
No problem at all.
Tornado.
So I also want you to understand, everyone watching this, that this is a process, right? This isn't going to be perfect the first time you put things on the page. You'll see Sandra and I just argued for 20 minutes about learning targets and which verb to use, okay? We didn't argue, it was amicable.
It was pretty.
However, it's really important for you to understand that it's okay that this is a messy process. It's not going to be perfect. And Sandra's made grids before. I've obviously made grids before as well. But if this is your first time, just get things on the page and then we can reflect and refine and improve as we go. And we can measure how those things are aligning to the targets and things that we've developed for the work. Because we have about 11 more minutes in this segment right now, and I'm trying to kind of fast forward so you can see the picture of the process. So let's really dig in. Do you have any level, so we got some labs on there. Let's see, do you have any level 3? Look, so this is the thing I love right here. You'll notice she's like, I don't know, I might put a Venn diagram right here. That's what needs to be happening in my opinion right now. You might go, hey, now here's a note about DOK and Venn diagrams, just so I'm gonna get nerdy on us, okay? A Venn diagram by itself is actually a DOK level 2. It's just categorization. But if we ask students to defend their placement of items using evidence, it becomes level 3. So the only thing I would suggest is if you're using a Venn diagram or a graphic organizer and you're like, that's level 3, compare and contrast, not necessarily. It could be just categorization, which is DOK level 2. So defending the reasoning is what makes something a level 3 and not a level 2. So I just want to be clear about that. So, and I want to thank Sandra for being willing to just deal with my nerdiness and pickiness about all of these things.
I think that's cool too, because it gives you like, then they do, I mean, you call it something like Venn diagram defense, right? And then they do that. They can do a video. They can do an actual video of them arguing with their friend, like, you know, defending it to their friend, like that kind of thing, which they would like that. Like I can find a catchy term that goes with that too.
And Candace Miller, who's another fantastic science teacher in Ohio, actually, is in her 4th year of building grids. And she said one of the beautiful things about the process is you can easily go back and you can change them. When you run a grid, you can go, that didn't go so well. I'm going to tweak a couple things, right? Or for next year. And actually a good practice, and I want to get away from this because I want to get some of the grid done for our audience here. But a good practice is while you're running your first grid or second grid or any grid, I would always print a copy and keep it on my desk. And I would make notes. As I was going through the grid, and I would say, never use this activity again. Fix this link, use different whatever, fix worksheet. And I wouldn't do all that work, but I would have it documented somewhere in my aura of understanding so that when I go back, I'm going to pull out that sheet of paper. I'm going to go, I need to fix these things. And at the end of each unit, I would make those changes. I would take 30 or 40 minutes maybe, and I would just go and update the grid so that I know when I pull that grid out next year, I've already made those changes, I've already made those updates, and it's ready to go. So that's just a fun practice. It's not fun, I guess, but it's a practice that can help save you a bunch of time and headache. Because there are going to be times when you're like, I know I have a grid for this, but I don't know how good it was. And then you start it and you go, oh no. You know, I remember now that there are all these issues from last year that I didn't fix. So that can be a really, really good opportunity. So Sandra, which level would you like to start with? Now, there's 2 schools of thought here. Some people go, I'm starting at level 1. Sweet. That's fine. Let's start at the beginning. That makes sense. Others have trouble with that. They go, let's start at the standard and then build up to it. So I'm actually okay with either of those concepts. Do you have a preference or a way you normally start this process?
Honestly, I normally start at level 1, but I'm figuring level 3 was the one I was struggling with the most when I was trying to think it through. So since I have you here, I'd rather do level 3 now and kind of work down if that's okay.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay. So let's talk about some activities that can meet the objective of comparing and contrasting the impact of certain natural phenomenon on the environment or well-being. So we already have a Venn diagram defense. I think you want your students creating a video, which is cool. That's kind of what it says. So let's keep that there.
Okay.
For right now, let's build out the level just like we did the whole grid, okay?
Yeah.
So let's get some ideas. Now, one thing that I want to be very clear about, the grid is a flexible document. I'm going to say that again. The grid and the template, which I will put in the comments if anyone wants it. I just put that in the comments if anyone needs it. bit.ly/grid-dev-template, all lowercase, is how you get access to this actual, like the blank version of this document if anyone needs it. And one thing I want to be clear about is if we only have two things on level 3 or three things and we don't need that fourth box, we should delete that fourth box, and that's okay. There don't need to be four things or five things. You can add boxes, take away boxes as needed. I want to be super duper clear about that, because sometimes people will go, Chad, I only have three things, but there's four boxes. Do I need to make another thing? Well, not if you've covered what you need to in the three things. No, you don't. You can make it two boxes if you need to. In Google Docs, which is what we're in, you can merge to make boxes go away. So you highlight both boxes and just merge them, or you can add a column or a vertical column and then merge the ones you don't want to add a box in a row. It's a little clunky on Google Docs. It's not my favorite, but we can deal with it. We can make it work. So what are some other activities you have kind of going on here that you can think of? Or do we need to talk through some ideas?
Yeah, maybe. I think that would be helpful, because I mean, I'm thinking of I'm trying to think of creative ways to, do the compare and contrast. So, I mean, I can ask them to make, I can ask them to make a little slide deck. I can ask them to do, like low tech versions of like dueling posters or whatever, like make one, make the other.
You could even do like scenario card sorts.
Oh.
So like maybe you explain or you have them watch newscasts of like the results of an event without naming the event. And you go, what event likely caused this and why? So like, what evidence is there? Does that make sense?
Yes.
So like, if I show a completely flattened, town in Indiana in the United States, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's a lot of debris everywhere. There's no recollection of water. There's no cracks in the land or anything like that. You could say, what do you think caused this and why, based on the evidence? You know what I mean? And what evidence do you have to support that claim? So one of the cool things about that is that it's directly measuring their ability to compare and contrast the impact only.
Yes.
So now we're starting at the level of the standard and we're working back to, can you define what you're seeing? Do you know the words to use to describe those things? So that could be an activity.
Yeah.
You could also have them look at different types of shelters. So like we're going to be having them design something in the next step, right? So could they look at existing ideas and say, look at these existing ideas, compare and contrast how they defend against a specific type of disaster? Does that make sense? Like, what types of forces do we have to negate or things like that? So we're sort of priming the pump for that project that we're going to have them do. So what are the existing things we can do to prevent tornadoes versus hurricanes? Not prevent them, but to combat the effects or impacts of those on environments or places. Like if you look at hurricanes in like the Outer Banks, right? Like they're trying to literally save the entire existence by building up land masses and things like that. Dunes, man-made dunes and green greenery to keep the same. I'm getting into the weeds here, literally and figuratively. But like having students think through things like that. Now you're combating erosion, you're combating weathering, you're combating hurricanes. All those things are kind of starting to make sense and connect. And I think it's important for students to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So this would also be a good point to keep an assessment of some sort. If you want to use a traditional assessment, I don't know if that's something that you want to do, but if you do, I think we can keep the assessment right kind of where it is, if you ask me.
Okay.
I don't think it may not be necessary, but if you want to do that, that would be a good kind of check, I think. Are you ready to do the project? And that assessment could be sort of a gateway into starting that project.
Now, would you do that as a conference kind of assessment? Like ask them the questions that you think they, okay.
Now we're getting into a whole nother thing we don't have time
Mm,
for, but you could absolutely do a graded conference here, a
mhm,
verbal check of some of those mastery questions that you
right.
develop. Can you answer these? Or you could do a traditional sort of tiered assessment, right? Have questions from each of the levels, make sure they have a firm grasp and understanding, reassess their understanding. Basically, do you still understand these things to continue learning, right?
Mhm.
So I think yes, if you want, is my answer to
Okay.
that. But it can also be a more traditional looking assessment if you feel like it. Some people prefer, graded conferences and other things like that.
Okay.
And Sandra, I don't know how to say this, and I'm a
I
little
know.
scared, but we are almost completely out of time. And actually,
Mm,
right now we're officially overtime.
okay.
Um, so I just had so much fun doing this with you today.
Yeah, me too.
Any final thoughts you have on reflecting on what we've done?
No, thank you. This was so good. Like I'm excited right now, and
I love
this is
that.
great. Oh yeah,
Anything you'd
it's
like
really
to
good.
share for the audience we have, or anyone thinking about doing grids, or maybe doing this work?
Just like I said, that it really changed my classroom. I mean, kids have been one of the reasons I wanted to do the science grid with you today is that the kids have been asking if we can do grid in science because they
That means you're doing something right.
yeah, we're doing something right here. So that's really good. But it has really changed a lot of things for me. It's made me kind of get to play the role as a teacher that I wanted to play before I started using grids. Like my frustrations in teaching are like, cut way down because of the grids. So I'm very grateful to you guys. Thank you.
So I'm going to give you the last say. If there's someone watching this that's wanted to do grids, they're kind of excited, but they're still scared. What would be the one piece of advice that you would give them after having done this?
Just do it. My first one, I
I
just did
love
it.
it.
And I also called it a mini. I said, this is a mini grid. And
Start
somehow,
small.
like for me, mindset wise, I was like, oh, it's a mini. It's fine. Like we're going to be fine. And we were fine. And my first grid, if I look at it today, is not great compared to what I've been doing lately. But at the time, it felt fantastic. And that was the main thing. And the kids loved it. The buy-in was huge, like almost right away. So
That is fantastic. Well,
yeah,
Sandra, I can't thank you enough. You are amazing.
thank
I
you.
truly appreciate your time and your willingness to share this process. I know it's not easy, kind of putting yourself out there like you have.
Mhm.
So, like, I want to let you know if we could get some green hearts in the comments for
Oh,
Sandra and just the amazing work she did with us this morning. That would be
wow.
awesome. Just show her some love from the Teach Better community and family. That would be awesome. Just to give everyone a heads up, tomorrow I will be working on a reading grid with the amazing Olivia Chan. Then on Wednesday, we'll be doing social studies with Joe Gonzalez. And then Ray's going to be taking over with Karen Evans and math on Thursday. And Friday, we're going to be doing writing with Ray and Marie McCumber. So we have a full week of Build a Grid takeover of Daily Drop In, and we're really excited about it. Sandra, thank you again and have a fantastic rest of your holiday break. Have
Thank
an
you.
amazing
You
day,
too,
everybody.
Chad. Thank you so much.